Have you ever stumbled upon a story so shocking it made your heart race and your hands tremble? This is one of those stories, a true tale of betrayal, cunning, and an unforgettable twist of fate. To respect the privacy of those involved, I've changed their names and locations, but every emotion and moment you're about to hear is real. So lean in and listen closely, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the latest stories. Don't forget to like this video and leave a comment saying, "I'm listening," so we can stay connected on this journey together. It was a gray, chilly autumn afternoon in Columbus, Ohio. The wind outside rattled the branches of the maple trees lining Maple Street, scattering red and yellow leaves across the front porch of the small wooden house at number 248. Inside, the kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon and brewed coffee. The old wall clock above the fridge ticked steadily, each sound like a soft tap on Laura Green's nerves, reminding her of time passing, and of something she couldn't yet name. Laura, 52, owner of a cozy flower shop called Autumn Bloom a few blocks away, sat at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a half-empty mug. Her husband's phone buzzed against the wood, the vibration making the spoon beside it tremble. She glanced at the screen and froze. The name Emily S. glowed in bold letters, the new employee from the Dallas branch Mark had once mentioned casually over dinner. Laura reached for the phone but stopped halfway. "No, Laura," she whispered to herself. "Don't snoop." She drew her hand back and instead looked at Mark's navy wool coat draped over the chair. The faint scent of an expensive floral perfume she didn't own rose up, wrapping around her like a taunt. She leaned in, sniffing again, her mind flashing back to their last anniversary when Mark had forgotten the restaurant reservation. "Just work, right? Just work," she murmured under her breath, but her stomach knotted tighter. Her fingers moved almost on their own. She unzipped Mark's leather briefcase, tucked neatly against the chair leg. Inside, amid papers and receipts, her eyes caught a thin slip of paper, a hotel receipt from the Hyatt in Cleveland, dated September 15th, room 612, 2 nights. She stared at the ink until it blurred. Her heart was hammering now. She set the paper down on the table carefully, as if it might shatter. The kitchen's soft light streamed through the window and landed across the receipt, across her trembling hands, like a spotlight on a secret she hadn't asked to uncover. "Why Cleveland?" she muttered aloud, her voice low and shaky. "You said you were in Chicago for the conference." She could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock, even the muffled laughter of a neighbor's TV through the wall. All of it made the silence inside her chest louder. She straightened her back, breathing deeply, forcing her face calm, but her hands still trembled. From upstairs, Mark's footsteps creaked across the floorboards. She quickly slipped the receipt back into the briefcase and zipped it shut, her heart pounding like a drum. The clock ticked again. Tick, tick. A sound she'd never noticed before, now beating like a war drum of doubt. "I need something clearer," she thought, staring at the clock as if it could give her answers. The suspicion wasn't just a thought anymore. It was a living thing, sitting at the table with her. The next morning dawned crisp and bright over Columbus, but Laura Green felt none of the sun's warmth. She loaded the back of her old Ford Transit van with buckets of sunflowers and baby's breath, pretending to be busy preparing a delivery for one of her regular hotel clients downtown. Mark was still upstairs shaving when she kissed the air vaguely and called out, "I've got an early delivery to make. Don't wait for me for lunch." Her voice sounded steady to her own ears, but inside she felt like she was walking on cracked ice. Traffic on High Street was sluggish. She drove on autopilot, eyes fixed on the road but mind racing. At the stoplight near Broad and 3rd, she caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. Pale face, tight jaw, eyes swollen from a sleepless night. "Pull yourself together, Laura," she muttered, fingers gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened. Instead of heading straight to her client, she turned onto a side street and parked near Bluebird Cafe, a small brick coffee shop with frosted windows and a blue neon sign shaped like a bird. Inside, the smell of espresso and cinnamon rolls wrapped around her like a blanket. She chose a corner table near the window, put down a small bouquet she'd brought as a cover, and opened her laptop. Her hands shook as she typed in the family email password Mark never bothered to change. When the inbox loaded, her stomach dropped. Dozens of messages from Emily S. lined the screen. She clicked the top one. The subject line read, "I miss you." Another. Counting the days. Her vision blurred. In one email, bold as a slap, she read, "Dad, I've booked the room already." Laura's hand flew to her mouth. "Dad!" she whispered, reading it again, the word burning her eyes. Around her, the cafe clinked with mugs and quiet chatter. She heard a barista call out, "Double latte for Megan," but it sounded far away, like underwater. She scrolled quickly, scanning more lines, affectionate nicknames, hotel details, secret plans. The screen swam with betrayal. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, but fresh tears welled. Taking a deep breath, she reached for her phone and began photographing each email one by one. Snap, snap, snap. The soft click of the camera felt like hammer strikes building a case she didn't want to make. She plugged in a small USB stick from her purse and saved copies, naming the folder, Truth. "It can't just be jealousy," she murmured under her breath. "I need the facts." Her own voice startled her, calm, cold, unlike herself. From her bag, a framed photo she'd meant to deliver with the flowers slipped out. Their wedding picture, 30 years ago in a church garden, Mark smiling as he held her hand. She stared at it for a long second, then slipped it back between the stems of lilies. Around her, a man in a business suit stirred sugar into his coffee. A student typed furiously on a laptop. Life went on as if nothing had changed, but Laura's world had tilted. Each file she saved felt like another knife carving into the life she'd built. She shut the laptop slowly, wiped her face, and straightened her back. The cafe's neon bird flickered on and off, casting blue light across her hands. She slid the USB into her coat pocket, took one last sip of lukewarm coffee, and whispered to herself, "Breathe, Laura. You have work to do." Then she picked up the bouquet, squared her shoulders, and walked out into the brisk Columbus air, her heart heavier but her resolve hardening with each step. Tuesday afternoon. The sky over Columbus was heavy with gray clouds, and a fine drizzle had begun to slick the streets. Laura Green drove slowly up North High Street, her windshield wipers squeaking rhythmically. She'd left the flower shop early, telling her assistant she had errands to run, but in truth her stomach churned with anticipation. In the passenger seat lay a manila envelope stuffed with photos, email printouts, and Mark's weekly schedule. She glanced at it at every stoplight, as if it might disappear. She turned into the small parking lot behind Rustic Bean, a cafe with weathered brick walls and wooden beams visible through the windows. Inside, the smell of roasted coffee and old oak floors greeted her, comforting yet tense, like the smell of a courtroom. She scanned the tables until her eyes settled on a man in a brown leather jacket sitting at the far corner, nursing a black coffee. A battered notebook lay in front of him, and his gaze was steady but not unkind. Laura adjusted her scarf, took a deep breath, and approached. "Mr. Miller?" she asked softly. The man stood, extending a firm hand. "Jack Miller. You must be Mrs. Green." His voice carried a low, gravelly timbre, the kind of voice that had seen too much, but kept it to himself. Laura's hand trembled slightly as she shook his. "Call me Laura," she said. "I need the truth, Mr. Miller. Not rumors, not gossip. The truth." Her eyes flicked to the manila envelope as she spoke. "Understood," Jack replied, gesturing to the chair opposite him. "Sit down. Tell me what you know so far." They sat. The cafe's yellow pendant lights cast a warm glow over the table, but Laura's face was pale, drawn tight like a wire. She slid the envelope across. Inside were printed emails, photographs of hotel receipts, and 2 small headshots of Mark and Emily. "This is my husband," she said quietly, tapping Mark's photo. "And this is Emily S., his employee. I know. Something is going on. I just need proof." Jack opened his notebook, scribbling neat notes as she spoke. "Where does he usually go? Any habits, regular trips?" She handed over a folded sheet of paper. "His schedule. Flights, meetings, hotel stays, everything I've gathered." He looked at it carefully, then back at her. "All right. Give me a week. I'll follow him discreetly. Photos, times, places. You'll have what you need." Laura leaned forward, her voice low and urgent. I don't want a scandal, Mr. Miller. I don't want shouting or public scenes. I just want clear pictures, clear facts. You'll get them, Jack said simply, closing his notebook. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hiss of the espresso machine and the murmur of college students in the corner filled the air. Laura picked up her coffee, now gone cold, and stared at the swirling cream, as if it could tell her the future. "Thank you," she whispered. Jack nodded. "You're not the first, Mrs. Green, but you're one of the calmest." She stood, gathering her coat. Outside, the drizzle had turned into rain, streaking the window glass. She gripped the paper cup tightly in her hand as she walked back to her van, feeling the heat leach away. A corner had been turned. She knew that when Jack called her next, she would either see her worst fears confirmed or finally be able to breathe again. But for now, all she could do was drive home and wait. A full week crawled by before Laura finally heard from Jack Miller again. Each day she opened her flower shop, arranged bouquets for weddings and funerals, smiled at customers, and went home at night to Mark's silent phone calls and his vague explanations about late meetings. Inside, though she felt like a taut wire ready to snap, when Jack's email finally appeared with the subject line, "We need to meet," her pulse spiked. They chose Goodale Park in downtown Columbus for the handover. On a cool Saturday morning, the park buzzed with joggers and families walking dogs under the tall oaks. The fountains sprayed fine mist into the air. Laura arrived early, wearing a navy coat and sunglasses, a paper bag from the cafe down the street in her hands to keep up appearances. She sat on a weathered wooden bench near the rose garden, her heart hammering against her ribs. She spotted Jack's brown leather jacket first. He walked toward her slowly, holding a plain manila envelope under his arm. He looked different in daylight, less like a detective from a movie, and more like a tired man doing a difficult job. He gave a slight nod as he approached. "Mrs. Green," he said softly. "Jack," she replied, forcing her voice steady. "You have something for me?" He sat beside her, placing the envelope gently on the bench between them. "I do. But you might want to take a deep breath first." Laura's fingers trembled as she reached for it. She slid out a stack of glossy photographs. The first showed Mark standing at the entrance of a high-rise hotel in Cincinnati, looking over his shoulder. In the next, a young blonde woman in a fitted blue dress, Emily S., age 28, walked up to him. Another image caught them holding hands as they stepped into an elevator together. Laura's breath hitched. "Oh my God," she whispered. The autumn air suddenly felt thin. She pressed her hand to her chest, the photos fluttering in her lap. Jack kept his voice low. "It's worse than you thought," he said, eyes fixed on the pond across from them. "They're not just having an affair." Laura turned to him sharply. "What do you mean?" Her voice cracked. He handed her a second envelope. Inside were printed screenshots of text messages Jack had obtained. The words burned her eyes. Emily suggesting plans to push Laura out and buy Autumn Bloom for themselves. Mark replying with details about upcoming contracts and suppliers. Laura blinked hard, the paper trembling in her hands. They want my shop?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Jack nodded once, his expression somber. "They're planning to take everything from you. Not just your marriage." For a moment, Laura couldn't speak. Children laughed somewhere behind them. A dog barked, and a breeze rustled the leaves overhead. She stared at the rose garden she'd once visited with Mark years ago, feeling her throat tighten. Finally, she found her voice. 30 years, she said, her tone a mixture of disbelief and rage. 30 years, and this is what I get. Jack rested his elbows on his knees, clasping his hands. "I'm sorry, Laura. I wish I had better news." She took a deep breath, folded the papers carefully, and slid them back into the envelope as if sealing a wound. When she looked up again, her eyes were no longer just sad. They burned with a cold, determined fire. "Thank you, Jack," she said quietly. "Now I know exactly what I'm dealing with." Jack gave a small nod of respect. "Whatever you decide next, be careful." Laura rose from the bench, clutching the envelope to her chest. As she walked back through the park, past joggers and children playing with kites, She felt a strange calm settle over her. The betrayal was no longer a shadow. It had a face, a place, and a plan. And now, so did she. That evening, as the pale autumn sun sank behind the sycamores along King Avenue, Laura drove home in silence. The envelope from Jack lay on the passenger seat like a weight pressing into her chest. She parked in the driveway of their 2-story brick house, sat for a long moment gripping the steering wheel, then finally exhaled and stepped out. The air smelled of damp leaves and distant wood smoke. Inside, the house was quiet. Mark had texted that he'd be late at the bank again, a line she now read as an insult. She went straight to the small room at the back of the house, once a sewing room, now her private office. With one decisive tug, she pulled the heavy beige curtains shut, shutting out the world. Laura set the envelope on the desk, opened her laptop, and began printing. One by one, the photos came out. Mark and Emily at the hotel, their hands intertwined, their heads bent close. She laid them carefully on the desk, each on a fresh sheet of white paper. Next, she printed the emails, the texts about pushing Laura out and taking over the shop, her fingers moving with a cold precision. She numbered each page with a red pen. September 15th, Cincinnati Hyatt. September 21st, text message 8:13 p.m. It was as if she were building a timeline for a courtroom. On the oak desk, she stacked other documents. Autumn Bloom's business contracts, supply agreements, financial statements, her marriage certificate, even the mortgage papers. They formed neat piles like bricks in a wall she was building for herself. As she worked, she murmured under her breath, 30 years of my life. I have to protect it. No one is going to take this from me. She paused, her gaze drifting to the row of orchids on the windowsill. Mark had given her the first one as a wedding gift. Now 5 pots bloomed pale purple. She reached out and ran a finger along a petal, whispering, "You thought I was just a quiet florist's wife, didn't you, Mark?" Her voice trembled but carried steel underneath. Pulling herself upright, she picked up her phone and scrolled to a number she hadn't called in years. Sam Rogers, an attorney she'd used once to negotiate a lease. She pressed call. "Sam? It's Laura Green," she said when his warm baritone answered. "I need to meet you. Friday, if possible." "Of course, Laura," he said after a beat of surprise. "Bring whatever documents you have. We'll talk it through." When she hung up, she opened a yellow legal pad and began to write. Step 1, organize evidence. Step 2, meet Sam Friday. Step 3, secure finances. Step 4, prepare Daniel. Her handwriting was firm, deliberate. Daniel, their only son, 25, finishing grad school in Chicago, had no idea. The thought of his shock made her stomach tighten. She scribbled a note to call him soon, to explain gently. "He deserves the truth," she murmured. "But not like this." The desk lamp cast a circle of warm light over the papers, making them glow like props laid out on a stage before the curtain rose. Laura leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. Her heart still ached, but there was a new steadiness in her breathing. She was no longer just a wife reeling from betrayal. She was becoming a strategist, a businesswoman, a mother protecting her future. In that small, curtained room on King Avenue, the first act of her legal battle had begun. Friday night fell quietly over Columbus. The lights of Autumn Bloom flickered out one by one as the last customers left with their bouquets. Laura locked the shop door, then lingered in the dim back room, the smell of roses and eucalyptus clinging to her clothes. Her hands shook slightly as she unzipped a small tote bag. Inside lay a brand new mini camera no bigger than a thumb, still smelling of plastic. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "I'm sorry it's come to this, but I need the truth." Moving carefully, she mounted the tiny camera high on a shelf in her office, tucking it between a stack of ribbon spools and a ceramic vase. She adjusted its angle toward the desk where Mark sometimes sat during his visits to the shop. Then she reached into her bag again and pulled out an old digital voice recorder, the kind reporters used years ago. Its black casing was scuffed from use. She thumbed the power button, hearing the faint click. Later that night, after Mark had fallen asleep in their bedroom, Laura slipped out to the garage. The air was cold and smelled of oil. She opened the passenger door of his silver sedan, crouched down, and taped the recorder beneath the seat with trembling fingers. "Forgive me for this, Daniel," she murmured, thinking of her son. "I wish I didn't have to hear any of it." Her voice sounded small and cracked in the empty garage. 2 days passed. Each one felt like an eternity. She went about her routines, arranging hydrangeas for a wedding, answering calls, smiling at customers. But her phone stayed in her apron pocket, waiting for a notification. When it finally buzzed late Sunday afternoon, she was alone in the shop, closing out the register. A new file had arrived from the recorder. Her heart pounded as she locked the door, drew the blinds, and put on her headphones. The first few seconds were static. Then came Mark's voice, low and familiar, yet suddenly foreign. "Once Laura signs the new contract, everything will be in your name." Laura's breath caught. She gripped the edge of her desk so hard her knuckles whitened. Emily's voice followed, bright and syrupy. "Don't worry, darling. She trusts you completely. She'll never see it coming." Mark chuckled softly. "By Christmas, we'll have it all wrapped up. The shop, the assets." Fresh start. Laura shut her eyes, the words slicing deeper than any affair. This wasn't just betrayal of the heart. It was theft of her life's work. Her chest heaved, and for a moment she thought she might be sick. She pressed stop, then rewinded a few seconds just to be sure. The same voices. The same plan. She took off the headphones, staring at the floor tiles until they blurred. Then she whispered, "That's enough." Her voice sounded colder than she had ever heard it. The shop was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator where the lilies were stored. Outside, the streetlights glowed amber. Laura straightened her shoulders, removed the headphones, and slipped the recorder into her bag. The evidence was no longer scattered suspicions. It was solid, undeniable. As she turned off the lights and locked the door behind her, the November wind hit her face like ice, but she walked to her car with steady steps. The game had changed. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, loud in the silence of the house. It was 2:00 in the morning on a cold November night, but Laura sat wide awake in the living room, a blanket draped loosely around her shoulders. The only light came from a small lamp in the corner, casting a soft yellow glow over the furniture. Outside, the wind rattled the branches against the windows like someone knocking to come in. She stared at the fireplace, though there was no fire. Her mind spun back to the early years of her marriage, Mark driving an old pickup truck to Cleveland every weekend, hauling boxes of flowers while she scrubbed down their first tiny storefront. "He believed in me then," she thought, rubbing her temples. "We built this together." The memory felt like a photograph fading at the edges. She reached for a framed picture on the coffee table, the three of them at Daniel's graduation. Mark's arm around her shoulders, Daniel's smile bright and full of hope. Laura held the frame to her chest, her fingers tightening until they ached. Tears slid down her cheeks before she could stop them. "Why, Mark?" she whispered into the empty room. "Why would you throw it all away?" Her voice cracked, echoing off the quiet walls. She set the frame down carefully and stood up, pacing the living room. The hardwood creaked beneath her bare feet. Her mind swirled with conflicting images, Mark's voice on the recording, Emily's laughter, the shop she had poured her life into. For a fleeting moment, a dark thought crossed her mind. Revenge. Something dramatic. Something that would hurt them as deeply as they had hurt her. She closed her eyes and gripped the back of a chair. "No," she murmured, shaking her head. "I won't destroy myself to destroy them." Her reflection in the window showed a pale, tired woman with fire in her eyes. She spoke to herself in a low, firm voice, as though giving a vow. "I will do this the right way. I will use the truth. I will use the law." She walked into the hallway and stopped at the mirror above the console table. Her own face stared back, puffy eyes, hair slightly mussed from sleeplessness, but beneath it all a steadiness she hadn't felt in days. She straightened her spine, running a hand through her hair. "I can't let this break Daniel's spirit," she whispered. "He deserves a mother who stands tall, not one consumed by hate." Returning to her office, she pulled out the yellow legal pad from earlier. Under Step 4, prepare Daniel, She drew a star and wrote in careful letters, "Protect him from the worst. Tell him gently." She set down the pen, exhaled, and looked once more at the stacks of evidence on her desk. They no longer felt like wounds. They felt like tools. In the quiet of that empty house on King Avenue, Laura realized she was changing. The hurt was still there, sharp and raw, but alongside it was a new resolve, a calmer strength. She touched the photo of Daniel once more, then whispered into the stillness, "A new Laura is coming." The words sounded strange but true, as if she were narrating her own rebirth. Monday morning dawned cool and clear over downtown Columbus. The streets glistened after an early rain, and traffic hissed along High Street as commuters hurried to work. Laura parked her sedan in the public garage and sat for a moment, her hands on the steering wheel, staring at the manila folder and USB drive resting on the passenger seat. This was the day she had decided to stop feeling like a victim. She closed her eyes, drew a long breath, and whispered, "No more hiding." She stepped out, heels clicking on the wet pavement, and walked toward a tall glass building with a bronze plaque. Rogers & Klein, attorneys at law. The lobby smelled faintly of polished wood and coffee. A receptionist with a headset greeted her warmly. "Mrs. Green? Mr. Rogers is expecting you. Right this way." Laura followed her down a corridor lined with framed photographs of Ohio landmarks. Inside the corner office, sunlight streamed through tall windows onto shelves of legal books. Sam Rogers rose from behind his desk, a tall man in his early 60s with silver hair and a steady gaze. "Laura," he said, extending his hand. "It's been a long time." She shook it firmly, though her palm was damp. "Sam, thank you for seeing me so quickly." She set the folder, USB, and a stack of printed photos on his desk. "I have everything here. Emails, texts, hotel receipts. I need to protect myself and my shop." Sam sat, adjusting his glasses. He opened the folder and began leafing through the evidence. His brows knitted as he read. "This," he muttered. "This is serious." He clicked open the USB on his laptop, scanning the files silently for a moment before looking up. "They're planning to transfer the shop into someone else's name?" Laura's throat tightened, but her voice was steady. "Yes, and I'm done pretending I don't know. I don't want drama. I don't want violence. I want justice." Sam nodded slowly, closing the folder. "All right, here's what we'll do. We'll file for divorce immediately, and at the same time petition the court to secure your ownership of Autumn Bloom. We'll freeze any attempted transfers. You have enough evidence here to make a strong case." Laura exhaled, a small shudder of relief running through her. "Thank you," she whispered. He slid a set of papers across the desk. "This is a power of attorney authorizing me to act on your behalf. Sign here and here." Her hands trembled slightly as she took the pen, but her eyes shone with determination. She signed her name slowly, the ink curling on the page like a final break from the past. Sam watched her. "And Daniel?" he asked gently. "He's going to need to know the truth sooner or later." Laura stared at the skyline outside the window, red and gold maple leaves spiraling down in the breeze like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence. "I'll tell him," she said softly, "but only when everything is certain. He deserves clarity, not confusion." Sam leaned back, folding his hands. "Fair enough. I'll start drafting the petitions today. You'll hear from me by the end of the week." Laura stood, smoothing her coat. The noise of the city reached them faintly through the glass. Horns, footsteps, the low hum of life moving on. She looked at Sam, then at the papers she'd just signed. "For the first time in months," she said quietly, "I feel like I'm standing on solid ground." He smiled kindly. "You are." As she stepped out into the crisp autumn air, the courthouse clock chimed 10. Laura paused on the sidewalk, tilting her face to the sky. The leaves swirled around her boots, and the scent of roasted coffee drifted from a street cart. She filled her lungs with the cool air, squared her shoulders, and walked on. No longer just a betrayed wife, but a woman taking back her life by the book. That evening, just after dusk, headlights swept across the driveway of the brick house on King Avenue. Laura, standing at the kitchen window with a mug of chamomile tea, recognized the dark blue Subaru immediately. Her heart gave a small jolt. Daniel had driven all the way from Chicago without warning. She watched as her 25-year-old son stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered in his gray hoodie and travel-creased jeans, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder. He paused on the porch, hesitating before knocking, as if bracing himself. Laura opened the door before he could. "Daniel," she said softly. He frowned, his brown eyes scanning her face. "Mom, what's going on?" "I've been calling." Mark hardly picks up. "You sound different on the phone." "Come in," she murmured, stepping aside. "It's cold out there." The house smelled faintly of lavender polish and the last batch of cinnamon muffins she'd baked that morning to steady her nerves. Daniel dropped his bag by the stairs, rubbing his hands together. "I couldn't stay in Chicago not knowing," he said. "You sounded scared." Laura led him into the kitchen, where the wooden table was set with 2 mismatched mugs. She poured hot tea from the pot, steam curling upward, and gestured for him to sit. "Chamomile," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It helps." He wrapped his fingers around the cup but didn't drink. "Mom, please, tell me." Laura took a deep breath, pulling a thick envelope from the counter. Her hands trembled slightly as she slid it across to him. "Daniel," she said quietly, "I need you to be strong for me now." He looked from the envelope to her face, confusion deepening. "What is this?" "Pictures," she whispered. "And messages. Things you deserve to know." Daniel opened the envelope. The first photograph showed Mark and Emily stepping into a hotel elevator. The second captured them laughing in a restaurant booth. He froze, his fingers tightening on the glossy paper. "No," he said hoarsely. "This can't be real." Laura reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "It's real," she said. "And it's worse than an affair. They're trying to take the shop, Daniel." "Our shop." Daniel's face drained of color. He pushed the photos aside and looked at her, jaw tight. "They want Autumn Bloom?" She nodded, eyes brimming. "Everything your father and I built. Everything I poured my life into." For a long moment, the only sound was the clock ticking above the stove. Then Daniel reached out, gripping her hands firmly. "Mom," he said, his voice steady despite the storm in his eyes. "We'll get through this. You're not alone." Laura blinked back tears, biting her lip to keep from sobbing. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she whispered. He stood and pulled her into a hug, his arms strong and warm around her. "It's okay," he murmured into her hair. "We'll fight this together. You're stronger than you think." She closed her eyes, leaning into her son's embrace. The kitchen light glowed softly on the wooden cabinets, on the teacups cooling on the table, on the envelope of evidence between them. Outside, the wind rattled the maple leaves against the window pane like a warning of the storm ahead. But in that moment, mother and son held on to each other, drawing strength for what was to come. On a rainy Tuesday morning, the sky over Columbus was the color of slate. Laura sat in the back corner of a small cafe across from the Franklin County Courthouse, the kind of place with chipped mugs and a bell over the door. She was early for her meeting with Sam Rogers, but she needed a few minutes alone to steady her hands. The smell of coffee and buttered toast mingled with the dampness from outside. She looked out the window at the courthouse's stone facade, thinking, "This is where everything will come to light." At 10 sharp, Sam walked in, his gray suit still wet at the shoulders. He set down his leather briefcase and slid into the booth across from her. "We're scheduled for a preliminary hearing at the Franklin County Court this Friday," he said, taking off his glasses to wipe them. "Are you ready for that, Laura?" Laura folded her napkin slowly, her fingers trembling. "I don't know if anyone's ever truly ready," she admitted, "but I'm done being quiet." "That's the right attitude," Sam said. "We'll file the divorce petition and a petition to protect the business at the same time. Mark and Emily can't touch Autumn Bloom once this is in motion." Laura nodded, then leaned closer. "I've also reached out to the Columbus Daily." Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "Not to make a scandal, but to protect the truth." Sam's eyebrows went up. "A reporter?" "They promised to keep my name off the record until the court documents are filed," she said. I want people to know what happened to me, to warn other women like me. And if Mark tries to spin his own story, the facts will already be out there." Sam tapped his fingers on the table thoughtfully. Just be careful. Once it's public, but I can understand why you'd want that. It shows the judge you're not hiding anything. Laura reached into her bag and pulled out a lined notebook filled with neat handwriting. This is my speech, she said. What I'll say in court. I've been writing it every night. Sam took the notebook, scanning the first page. It's strong, he said. Very strong. Back at home that evening, the kitchen smelled of rosemary and chicken soup. Daniel sat at the old oak table, sleeves rolled up, reading his mother's notes. You don't need to apologize in the first paragraph, he said, looking up. You didn't do anything wrong, Mom. Laura exhaled slowly, watching her son's steady expression. It feels strange telling strangers about your father. About our life. Milam Jung Roy, he said softly in Vietnamese, the language Laura's own mother had used with him when he was small. You're doing the right thing, she smiled faintly. Do you really think so? I know so, Daniel replied, handing the papers back. Laura looked at the stack of documents, the notes, the photographs. For the first time in months, her shoulders felt a little lighter. Fear still flickered in her stomach, but it was mixed with something else. Relief. The storm she had been bracing for was almost here, but at least she wouldn't be facing it alone. She glanced at the calendar pinned to the fridge. Friday's date was circled in red ink. The day of judgment, she thought. Outside, the rain had stopped, and a thin line of sunlight broke through the clouds, glinting off the courthouse dome across town. Friday morning dawned gray and cool over Columbus. The kind of Midwestern morning where your breath fogs the air even in spring. At 8:30 sharp, the Franklin County Courthouse was already buzzing, heels clicking across marble floors, voices echoing in the high-ceilinged lobby. Laura stood at the foot of the wide staircase, smoothing the front of her pale blue suit jacket with trembling fingers. In her other hand, she clutched a thick leather folder filled with documents, photos, and USB drives. Daniel walked beside her, tall and serious in a charcoal sweater, his hand brushing her elbow as if to steady her. You okay, Mom? He murmured. Laura managed a faint smile. I'm okay, honey, just breathe with me. She inhaled slowly, trying to quiet the drumbeat in her chest. They passed through the security checkpoint and into courtroom 3B. The space smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper. Rows of benches were filled with curious onlookers, bank employees who knew Mark, a few neighbors from Maple Street, and a reporter from the Columbus Daily with a small notepad balanced on her knees. The air had that heavy, waiting quality of a storm about to break. At the far end of the aisle, Mark appeared in a dark navy suit, his tie slightly askew. He walked stiffly, eyes fixed on the floor. Beside him, Emily kept her head down, oversized sunglasses masking her face even inside the courtroom. Her hands were clasped tightly around a designer purse. Their attorney, a tall man with silver hair, whispered something to Mark, who only nodded, his jaw clenched. Laura's stomach twisted, but she straightened her shoulders. She and Daniel took seats at the plaintiff's table. Sam Rogers, her attorney, was already there, typing on his laptop. We'll start with the photos and emails, he said quietly. Stay calm, Laura, let the evidence speak. The bailiff called the court to order. Everyone rose as Judge Harris entered, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a calm voice. She glanced over the docket, then looked up. We're here for the matter of Green versus Green, she said. Ms. Green, Mr. Green, please present your counsel. Sam stood, introducing himself, then gestured to Laura. Across the room, Mark's attorney did the same. Emily shifted uncomfortably, removing her sunglasses only long enough to wipe her eyes. Counsel for the plaintiff may proceed, Judge Harris said. Sam opened his laptop and connected it to the projector. The lights dimmed slightly as the first image appeared on the large screen. A photograph of Mark and Emily holding hands in the lobby of the Hyatt Cincinnati. A ripple of murmurs moved through the courtroom. A bank teller Laura recognized covered her mouth with her hand. Judge Harris leaned forward. Mr. Green, do you have an explanation for this photograph? Mark's lips parted, but no words came. He stared at the screen, then at the floor. Emily's voice was a whisper, trembling. It was just work, she said, her eyes darting toward Mark. Sam clicked to the next slide. An email exchange showing Emily writing about transferring the shop, and Mark replying, "Once she signs, we can take everything." Gasps rose from the benches. Daniel sat rigid beside his mother, fists clenched on his knees. Laura forced herself to breathe evenly, her nails biting into her palm under the table. She wanted to shout, to cry, but instead she kept her gaze fixed on Judge Harris. "This is the truth," Laura said quietly, almost to herself, but Daniel heard. "I know, Mom," he whispered back. Judge Harris raised a hand. "Order in the court," she said. "We will hear all evidence before making any determinations." Her eyes moved from Laura to Mark. "Mr. Green, you will have an opportunity to respond." Mark still said nothing, his shoulders hunched. Emily's hands shook as she reached for a tissue. Laura looked at them both. The man she had built a life with, the woman she had welcomed like family, and drew a slow breath. For the first time, she felt not just pain, but a kind of quiet strength. This was the beginning of the reckoning she had waited for. The courtroom had grown noticeably warmer as the morning wore on. The hum of the overhead lights, and the occasional creak of benches punctuating the heavy silence. Laura sat rigidly at the plaintiff's table, her pale blue suit now feeling tight across her shoulders. Daniel, seated beside her, shifted slightly but kept his hand on his mother's arm. Sam Rogers, her attorney, adjusted his glasses and rose with deliberate calm. "Your Honor," Sam began, his voice steady but resonant, "we have one final piece of evidence." Judge Harris nodded, folding her hands. "Proceed, Mr. Rogers." Sam reached into his briefcase and took out a small digital recorder. He plugged it into the court's audio system. A soft hiss filled the speakers. "This recording was obtained legally," Sam explained. "It captures a conversation between Mr. Mark Green and Ms. Emily Sanders regarding the transfer of ownership of Autumn Bloom." Laura's breath caught. She stared at the small machine as though it were a living thing about to speak. The first voice came through, unmistakably Mark's, calm, calculated, almost casual. "When Laura signs the new contract, we'll take the whole shop," the recording said, his tone clipped but confident. A collective gasp rippled through the benches. Someone in the back whispered, "Did he really just say that?" Then Emily's voice followed, lighter but laced with a kind of conspiratorial sweetness. "Don't worry, darling," she cooed. "She'll never know." Laura's stomach turned. The words, once only suspected, now existed in cold, undeniable sound waves. She closed her eyes for a moment, gripping Daniel's hand under the table. Judge Harris leaned forward, her brow furrowing. "Mr. Green," she said sharply, "is this your voice on the recording?" All eyes turned to Mark. He shifted in his chair, his face blotchy, his fingers twisting the edge of the table. Yes," he murmured, barely audible. "But it's not what it sounds like." Judge Harris raised an eyebrow. "It seems quite clear, Mr. Green." Sam glanced at Laura and gave a slight nod, a silent reassurance. Laura squeezed Daniel's hand. He whispered, "Mom, you did the right thing," his voice both proud and sad. On the other side of the room, Emily was visibly trembling. Her sunglasses lay forgotten on the table, and mascara streaks lined her cheeks. "I didn't," she began, but her attorney leaned in, murmuring urgently. Emily bit her lip and stared down at her hands, tears dripping onto the polished wood. Judge Harris tapped her pen against the bench. "We will take a 30-minute recess to review this evidence and allow counsel to confer with their clients." Her tone was measured but unmistakably grave. The bailiff announced the recess. People began to stand, murmuring, exchanging shocked glances. The Columbus Daily reporter scribbled furiously. Laura remained seated for a moment, staring at the emptying courtroom. The weight of years of marriage, trust, and labor pressed down on her, but alongside it was a strange lightness. The truth, at last, was no longer just hers to bear. Daniel rose, helping her to her feet. "Let's get some air, Mom," he said softly. Outside in the hallway, sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting warm squares of light across the tile floor. Laura drew a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. Whatever came next, She knew this was the turning point she had fought for. The hallway outside the courtroom buzzed like a hive. Reporters huddled in clusters, their cameras flashing with sharp bursts of light that bounced off the marble walls. The faint scent of coffee and ink mixed with the metallic tang of nervous anticipation. Laura held Daniel's arm tightly, trying to steady herself as they stepped into the corridor. "Mrs. Green, over here." "Mrs. Green!" Voices called from every direction. Microphones were thrust toward her face, cameras angled low and high, desperate to capture her reaction. A young female reporter with auburn hair from Columbus Daily pushed forward, her notebook already half filled. "Mrs. Green," she asked breathlessly, "do you have any statement about the evidence we just heard in court? How do you feel knowing your husband and his assistant were plotting against you?" Laura paused, her lips trembling for a moment before she composed herself. She straightened her blazer, looked directly at the reporter, and spoke clearly. "I only want the truth to come to light," she said, her voice firm though lined with emotion. "This is not about revenge. I don't want violence. I just want justice. For myself, for my son, and for the business I've built with 30 years of work." The crowd hushed, scribbling furiously. The reporter nodded, her expression softening. "Thank you, Mrs. Green." By noon, the headline was already live on the Columbus Daily website. Bank manager and young assistant accused of fraud. Wife presents. Explosive evidence in court. A photo accompanied it, Laura walking out of the courtroom, Daniel by her side, his hand gently on her shoulder. Her face, though pale, radiated quiet strength. Social media exploded. On Facebook, neighbors shared the article with words like, "Stay strong," "Laura, and she deserves justice." On Twitter, hashtags began to trend locally. "Justice for Laura," "Autumn Bloom," and even "Betrayed but Brave." Comments poured in. "She's a pillar of our community. How could he do that to her? I buy flowers from her shop every spring. Sending her all my support. This is heartbreaking, but she's handling it with such dignity." Daniel scrolled through the feed on his phone, his thumb moving faster than his eyes could keep up. He turned to his mother, his voice steady but full of feeling. "Mom, look at this. People are on your side. They believe you." Laura leaned in, reading over his shoulder. For a moment, her eyes glistened, not from sadness, but from an odd mix of relief and sorrow. "It's comforting," she whispered. "But remember, Daniel, this is only the beginning. The fight isn't over." A few feet away, Mark stood stiffly near a window, his lawyer murmuring in his ear. His once confident posture had collapsed. His face was pale, jaw clenched. He avoided looking at the reporters, who now regarded him like vultures circling prey. His gaze flicked toward Laura only once, then dropped quickly to the floor. Emily, her mascara smudged, clutched her phone with shaking hands. Her voice carried down the hallway tight with panic. "No, listen to me!" she hissed into the receiver. "The story is everywhere. We're finished if this keeps spreading. Do something." The corridor seemed to vibrate with tension, as if the very air had been pulled taut like a violin string. Every glance, every whispered word, every camera click added to the pressure. For Laura, though, standing in the center of it all, there was a sense of clarity. The world finally knew. The mask had fallen. She squeezed Daniel's arm and whispered almost to herself, "Truth has a way of finding daylight." At precisely 1:15 p.m., the bailiff's voice echoed through the courtroom of Franklin County as everyone was ordered back to their seats. The chatter died down, leaving only the soft creak of benches and the hum of the air conditioner. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting golden beams across the polished wood panels. Laura sat at the plaintiff's table, her palms flat against the cool surface, trying to slow the tremor in her hands. Daniel sat beside her, his arm brushing hers in a quiet gesture of support. The heavy oak door at the front swung open, and Judge Reynolds re-entered, a thick file clutched in his hands. His black robe swayed slightly as he mounted the bench. The courtroom rose, then sat again in unison. Laura's heart thumped like a drum. She glanced across the aisle. Mark sat rigid, his lawyer whispering something that he didn't seem to hear. Emily dabbed at her eyes with a crumpled tissue, her dark sunglasses now pushed up on her head like a forgotten disguise. Judge Reynolds cleared his throat, flipping open the file. His voice, when it came, was measured but firm. Based on the evidence presented, photographs, electronic communications, financial records, and audio recordings, this court finds sufficient grounds to grant immediate protective measures regarding the business known as Autumn Bloom. Laura felt her breath catch. She gripped Daniel's fingers under the table. "It is hereby ordered," the judge continued, eyes scanning the room, "that full ownership and operational control of Autumn Bloom Flower Shop remain with Mrs. Laura Green. Any attempt by Mr. Mark Green or Ms. Emily Saunders to interfere with or transfer ownership is prohibited. Effective immediately. Furthermore, due to indications of potential fraudulent activity, this matter will be referred to the Economic Crimes Division for further investigation." A collective murmur rippled through the courtroom. Someone gasped. Laura's vision blurred with tears. She raised a trembling hand to her face, feeling the salt of 30 years of work, betrayal, and perseverance distill into that moment. Across from her, Mark exhaled sharply, his shoulders sagging. He covered his face with both hands, as if hiding from the eyes of the community he had once commanded respect from. Emily's sob broke the tense silence. "I didn't want it to end like this," she whispered hoarsely, turning away from the judge's bench. Daniel squeezed his mother's hand, leaning close. "Mom," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion, "you won. Justice is on your side." Laura closed her eyes for a second, inhaling the scent of old wood and paper that filled the courtroom. She wasn't thinking about winning, she was thinking about surviving. When she opened them again, she saw Sam Rogers gathering up the neatly organized binders and USB drives, his expression calm but satisfied. "We'll move forward with the divorce proceedings next," he said quietly to her, sliding the last folder into his briefcase. Laura nodded, dabbing at her cheeks with a tissue. Her gaze drifted toward the window, where the afternoon sun spilled across the floor like a golden river. Outside, the maples along High Street were just beginning to turn, their leaves catching fire in the crisp autumn air. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of release, like the season was changing inside her too. She straightened in her chair, exhaling slowly. "It's over for now," she whispered to Daniel. "No, Mom," he said gently. "It's the beginning of something new." Laura looked at him and managed a faint smile. The judge's gavel tapped once, echoing through the chamber like a full stop at the end of a long, painful sentence. That night, after the courthouse emptied and the headlines began to spread across Columbus, Laura and Daniel drove back slowly to the small cedar-sided house on Maple Street. The sky had turned a deep indigo, and a thin drizzle misted the windshield, blurring the streetlights into glowing orbs. Daniel drove in silence, his fingers drumming lightly on the steering wheel, while Laura stared out the passenger window at the passing rows of maples, whose leaves lay scattered on the wet pavement like pieces of old paper. When they finally pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly as it had that morning. Wooden steps, brass porch light glowing softly, a wreath of dried autumn flowers on the door. But for Laura, everything felt changed. She carried her briefcase inside, the leather worn from weeks of preparation, and set it down with a soft thud on the hall table. The scent of lavender and old books wrapped around them like an old quilt. Without a word, she moved to the kitchen and filled the kettle. The hiss of water on the burner filled the room. Daniel took off his jacket, hung it on the hook, and leaned against the counter, watching his mother with a look that mixed worry and admiration. "Mom," he said quietly, "are you tired?" Laura opened the cupboard, took down 2 mismatched mugs, and reached for the tin of peppermint tea. "Yes," she admitted, pouring the boiling water over the leaves. "But my heart feels lighter tonight." She handed him a steaming mug and smiled faintly. "Here, this will warm you up." They carried their tea to the old wooden table by the window. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the street was damp, reflecting the glow of the street lamps. Brown and gold leaves drifted lazily down, sticking to the glass. Daniel broke the silence first. "Do you think the radio will say something about today?" Laura reached across and turned the small kitchen radio on. A news anchor's voice floated out. "The case involving Mark Green, longtime bank manager, and his associate Emily Saunders." Laura's stomach clenched. Without a word, she reached over and clicked it off again. "Not tonight," she said softly. Daniel nodded, then took a sip of tea. "You're still going to open the shop tomorrow?" he asked. "Of course," Laura answered, a spark of determination in her eyes. "Autumn Bloom has been my life for 30 years. It doesn't stop because of them." She gave a small, tired laugh. The yellow glow from the lamp cast their shadows onto the wall. 2 figures side by side. Not just mother and son, but almost like old friends holding each other up. Laura stood and walked to the mantel where the family photograph had always sat. She lifted it carefully, wiped the dust from the frame, and after a long pause, slid it into a drawer of the old sideboard. The click of the drawer closing sounded like a period at the end of a sentence. "Let me help you reorganize the shop," Daniel said suddenly, his voice firm. "I'm here now." Laura turned, her eyes softening. "Would you really stay here for a while?" she asked. "I was planning on it anyway," he replied, setting down his mug. A fragile peace settled over the kitchen, like the quiet after a storm. The kettle clicked off, the wind outside calmed, and for the first time in weeks, Laura allowed herself to breathe deeply. She reached across the table, squeezed Daniel's hand, and whispered, "We'll rebuild, you and I." Daniel smiled back. "Together," he said simply. The house felt warmer, as if the walls themselves were exhaling. In that small moment, 2 cups of tea, falling leaves, and the promise of a new morning, the chaos of the past months faded just enough for hope to slip back in. Monday morning arrived crisp and clear, sunlight pouring over Maple Street like a soft golden sheet. At 6:30 a.m., while most of the neighborhood was still quiet, Laura unlocked the front door of Autumn Bloom. The familiar chime above the entrance jingled, echoing off the polished wooden floors. She paused for a moment, inhaling deeply the scent of roses, lilies, and freshly brewed coffee from the shop's tiny corner pot. It was the first morning back after the storm of the trial, and her hands trembled slightly as she set her purse down on the counter. Daniel followed her in, carrying 2 boxes of fresh roses from the supplier. "Let's start with the display tables, Mom," he said, rolling up his sleeves. His voice carried a brightness that had been missing for months. Together, they began to arrange bunches of red and white roses, tucking sprigs of baby's breath between the stems. The shop smelled alive again. At 7 a.m., the first customer of the day arrived, a familiar figure in a blue coat and woolen scarf. "Mrs. Green," the woman said warmly, stepping inside. "I read about everything in the paper. You're a brave lady. We're all behind you." She reached across the counter to squeeze Laura's hand. Laura blinked back tears and smiled. "Thank you. I just want to do honest work and make beautiful things for people. That's all I've ever wanted." The woman nodded, glancing at the displays. "Your shop feels brighter than ever." She picked up a bouquet of yellow tulips. "These for my daughter's recital." While Laura rang up the sale, Daniel was in the back hanging a new chalkboard sign. In careful block letters, he wrote free delivery for seniors and hospital patients. Autumn Bloom Cares. He propped it by the front door so passers-by could see it from the sidewalk. "Good idea, sweetheart," Laura said when she noticed. "It's exactly what this place should stand for." Daniel grinned, wiping chalk dust from his fingers. "We're going to be stronger than before, Mom. People know who you are now. They'll come here because they trust you." All morning the doorbell kept chiming, each ring a small burst of hope. Neighbors brought coffee and hugs. A teenage boy dropped off a thank you card from his mother. A young couple ordered centerpieces for their wedding. The shop felt like a hive of color and conversation. Laura moved through it all with a quiet steadiness, arranging orchids, trimming stems, answering questions. Yet inside she felt something she hadn't in months, a pulse of confidence. The betrayal and the courtroom had taken so much. But here, in this sunlit shop with her son by her side, she could see her future again. Near noon, she stepped outside to straighten the sign by the window. The autumn sun caught the gold lettering of the shop's name, Autumn Bloom, and made it glow. She reached out, brushed a speck of dust from the glass, and whispered to herself, "We're still here." Daniel came to the doorway, wiping his hands on an apron. "Lunch break?" he asked. In a minute, Laura replied, smiling at him. The bell above the door chimed again as another customer stepped in, bringing with them the scent of crisp fall air. Laura turned back, shoulders squared. It was the sound of a new beginning. While autumn bloom slowly regained its glow under Laura and Daniel's hands, a very different scene unfolded across town. Mark Green, once the respected manager of a downtown Columbus bank, had been suspended pending the fraud investigation. The bank had issued a short press release, and his name had appeared in the business section of the paper with the headline, "Local Manager Under Inquiry." Overnight, the man who used to wear tailored suits and shake hands with city leaders became someone who pulled a baseball cap low over his eyes when he went out for groceries. He rented a one-bedroom apartment off a quiet street in Westerville, north of the city. The building smelled faintly of old carpet and microwave dinners. Most evenings he sat in the dim light of the living room, blinds drawn, a half-finished sandwich on the coffee table, the television flickering silently. His phone buzzed with messages from reporters he didn't answer. Sometimes he stared at the screensaver of his laptop, photos from a trip to Hocking Hills years ago, Laura and Daniel smiling, and felt a sharp twist of regret. Emily Saunders, meanwhile, had been fired from her position at the Dallas branch after the story broke. She packed her things in cardboard boxes and moved back to her parents' modest home in Dayton. Her mother avoided eye contact at church, and neighbors whispered in the grocery store aisles. Emily spent long afternoons in her childhood bedroom scrolling through social media, where her name appeared in angry comments under articles about the autumn bloom case. One rainy evening, Mark sat at his small kitchen table staring at his phone. After a long hesitation, he dialed Laura's number. The line clicked and her voice came through, steady, cool. "Hello? Laura," he said, his voice rough. "I'm sorry. For everything. Please, let me at least talk to Daniel." There was a pause. He could hear her breathing. Finally, she answered quietly. "Mark, please. Just let us be. We're trying to heal." Before he could reply, another voice came on the line. Daniel had picked up in the other room. His tone was flat, distant. "Dad, don't call us anymore." "Son, please." Mark's voice cracked. "I was wrong. I made terrible choices." But the line went dead. He stared at the phone, then set it down slowly, pressing his palms to his eyes. In the silence of the apartment, the hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. Emily tried too. She sent Laura a text late one night. "I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far." Laura read it in bed, the blue glow of the screen lighting her face. She placed the phone back on the nightstand without replying. Some things, she thought, didn't deserve an answer. The local papers continued to run follow-up pieces on the autumn bloom case, framing it as a cautionary tale about trust and small business. Each new headline seemed to push Mark and Emily further out of the world they had once occupied. Their faces faded from the public's sympathy, then from its memory. Back on Maple Street, Laura sometimes caught herself glancing at the old family photos before putting them back in the drawer. Mark and Emily had become like shadows, figures that had once loomed large but now slipped silently out of her life, leaving only a faint trace, like footprints washed away by rain. By the time winter gave way to a soft Ohio spring, Laura had begun to weave a new routine into her days. 3 times a week, she drove her aging Subaru Outback across the city to the community center on High Street for the 7 a.m. yoga class. The sun would just be rising over Columbus, casting a pale gold across the empty parking lot as she rolled out her mat in the bright studio, smelling faintly of eucalyptus. On her second week, she met Sandra, a silver-haired woman of about 60, who had an easy laugh and eyes that had clearly seen storms. After class, while slipping on their shoes, Sandra struck up a conversation. "You're new here," she said warmly. "I'm Sandra. Been coming since my divorce." Laura smiled, tucking her hair behind her ear. "I'm Laura. Same story, different ending, I guess." Over cups of herbal tea from the vending machine, Sandra listened as Laura briefly mentioned the trial in the shop. "You're stronger than you know," Sandra said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "I'm just doing what I have to," Laura replied with a small smile. Some days I still feel like I'm learning how to stand. Back at home on Maple Street, Daniel was making changes of his own. One afternoon, he spread a stack of course brochures across the kitchen table. "Mom, look at this," he said, his face lighting up. "There's a landscape design program starting this summer at Columbus State. I'm thinking about enrolling. We could start a floral decor service together. Weddings, events, gardens. You'd handle the flowers. I'd handle the design." Laura's eyes softened as she looked at her son, so earnest and hopeful. "That sounds wonderful," she said, stirring a pot of soup on the stove. "We've always been a good team." Evenings became their anchor. They would cook simple meals, roasted chicken, pasta with herbs from the small planter box out back, and sit at the old kitchen table where so many difficult conversations had been held. Now, laughter began to slip back into the room. Daniel would tell her about new ideas he'd read online. She'd tell him stories from the early days of autumn bloom. Sometimes they simply worked in companionable silence, the radio playing soft jazz in the background. At night, when the house grew quiet, Laura sat at her desk with a leather-bound journal she had bought at a flea market. She wrote about her fears, her gratitude, and the outlines of new plans. On one page, she drew a rough sketch of a second shop in Cleveland, shading in little flowers around the sign. One evening, Daniel came up behind her, peering over her shoulder. "Mom, are you thinking of opening a new branch?" he asked, half teasing. Laura capped her pen and leaned back. "Maybe. But I want to find peace first," she said, glancing at the window where the porch light glowed. "I'm learning that peace is as important as success." The desk lamp illuminated her notes and drawings like a small stage set for the future. She closed the journal gently, feeling a sense of quiet pride. After months of surviving, she was beginning to live again. Outside, the spring night was mild. Inside, in that little house on Maple Street, the smell of chamomile tea mingled with the sound of Daniel humming in the kitchen, and Laura felt, for the first time in a long while, that a new life was indeed taking shape. The following May, Columbus burst into color. On the wide lawns of the Ohio State Fairgrounds, tents and booths sprouted like blossoms for the annual Ohio Bloom Festival, the state's largest flower show. Morning sunlight streamed through white canopies, glinting off buckets of dew-fresh roses, orchids, and peonies. The scent of lilac and damp earth hung in the warm air. Laura and Daniel arrived just after dawn, their van filled to the roof with crates of arrangements from Autumn Bloom. Daniel rolled up his sleeves and began unloading wooden stands and chalkboard signs while Laura smoothed the creases from the pale green dress she had chosen for the day. She tucked a small white daisy behind her ear, a quiet nod to the first flowers she had ever sold. By 9 o'clock, their booth was ready, a rustic trellis draped with ivy, tables covered in linen and lined with bouquets of every shade. A hand-painted sign read, "Autumn Bloom, from heartbreak to hope." Passers-by slowed, drawn by the colors in the story. "Mom, look at the crowd already," Daniel whispered, adjusting a bucket of sunflowers. Laura took a deep breath, letting the hum of voices and camera clicks wash over her. "It feels different this year," she murmured, "like a real new beginning." Soon journalists with press badges began to circle. One young woman with a recorder stepped forward. "Mrs. Green, I'm Emily from the Columbus Daily. Could you share a few words about your journey? People are calling it From Tragedy to Bloom." Laura smiled gently, her hands resting on the edge of the table. "I've learned that truth and the law are stronger than hate," she said, her voice steady but warm. "And that beauty can grow even from pain." The reporter nodded, eyes shining, while Daniel stood beside his mother, one hand on her shoulder. He had on a crisp white shirt rolled at the sleeves, and his expression was unmistakably proud. "She's my hero," he told another visitor who asked about the shop. All morning, customers streamed in, young couples, retirees, students with canvas bags. They admired the orchids arranged in heart shapes and the vibrant marigolds Daniel had added as a new line. "We read about you in the paper," an older woman said, slipping a card into Laura's hand. "You give people like us courage." Laura's throat tightened, but she managed a soft, "Thank you. We just want to do honest work and share some beauty." Near midday, Sandra appeared through the crowd, her silver hair catching the sun. She hugged Laura tightly. "You did it," she whispered. "You turned your story into hope." Laura laughed, a bright, unguarded sound. "We're still turning," she said, "but it feels lighter now." Children passed by holding balloons shaped like flowers. The festival band began playing a lively folk tune, and the scent of kettle corn drifted from a nearby stall. Laura looked around at the sea of blooms, the smiling faces, the handwritten signs of support taped to their booth. For the first time in a long while, she felt her heart swell not with pain but with genuine, grounded happiness. Daniel caught her eye and grinned. "Mom," he said over the music, "this is just the beginning." Laura nodded, her fingers brushing the daisy in her hair. Under the bright May sky of Columbus, surrounded by flowers and people who believed in her, she knew he was right. The night deepened around the old porch, but inside Laura's heart there was a lightness she hadn't felt in years. She and Daniel sat quietly, sipping the last of their tea, watching the stars shimmer above Maple Street. The sound of cicadas faded into the distance, replaced by a peaceful stillness. For the first time, the house felt like a true home again. Not a place haunted by betrayal, but a shelter of resilience and new beginnings. Laura closed her notebook and set it aside. "We've come so far," she whispered. Daniel nodded, leaning back with a small smile. "Mom, everything we went through, it made us stronger. It's not just your story anymore, it's ours." She squeezed his hand, feeling the warmth of his fingers. "Yes," she said, "we survived and we rebuilt, and we found ourselves again." As the porch swing creaked gently, Laura thought back to the first flicker of doubt. The sleepless nights, the courthouse tension, and the long road of rebuilding autumn bloom. All of it had led here, to a quiet summer evening where the scent of jasmine mixed with hope. She understood now that true victory was not in punishing the past, but in nurturing the future. To everyone listening to this story, let it be a reminder, no matter how deep the hurt, honesty, courage and patience can grow new life where something seemed broken, holding on to your integrity, even when it's hard, is more powerful than revenge. If you've felt moved by Laura's journey from suspicion to justice to renewal, we'd love for you to stay connected. Please like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story of strength and transformation. And leave a comment below saying, "I'm listening." It helps us know you're here and walking alongside these stories. Laura took a deep breath, her eyes on the stars. "Tomorrow is a new day," she murmured. Daniel smiled. "Yes, and we're ready." This is not just the end of a story. It's a testament to healing, dignity, and hope. From the ashes of betrayal, beauty can bloom again. See you in the next video.